When Dr. Morrison told Keisha Thomas that her breast cancer was stage 3 and had already spread to her lymph nodes, the first thing she did was call her husband of 18 years. She needed to hear him say they would get through this together. Keisha had discovered the lump 3 weeks earlier, during a shower. She was soaping her chest when her fingers caught on something hard, something that didn't belong. She knew immediately. Most women know. There's a particular terror in finding something in your own body that your body shouldn't have. She told David that same day. He held her. He said all the right things. He said he wasn't going anywhere. He said they would face this as a team. The radiologist confirmed what Keisha already suspected. The biopsy confirmed cancer. Stage 3 meant aggressive. 18 months of treatment if all went well. Surgery, chemotherapy, radiation. The full onslaught. Dr. Morrison explained everything clinically but with compassion. She explained the survival rates. She explained what chemotherapy would do to Keisha's body. She explained the side effects. Nausea, hair loss, exhaustion that sleep couldn't fix, mouth sores, joint pain, a particular kind of weakness that would make climbing stairs feel like climbing mountains. Keisha listened. She took notes. She asked questions. Then she called David from the parking lot. David answered on the second ring. His voice changed when she told him. The lightness drained out of it. He became serious, present, committed. He said he would take time off work. He said they would get through the appointments together. He said her health was the only thing that mattered now. He said he loved her. He said nothing would change how he felt about her. He said he was not going anywhere. Keisha believed him. She had no reason not to. They had built 18 years together. He had been there for every significant moment. There was no history of abandonment, no pattern of running when things got difficult. He was a corporate attorney, a man of reliability and presence. Keisha hung up the phone and cried in her car, but not entirely from fear of cancer. Some of her tears were from relief. She was not facing this alone. Keisha and David had not been passionate for many years. Passion had faded somewhere between the 3rd and 5th years of marriage, which is normal enough for most couples. What remained was stability. They had built a functional life together. Keisha worked in pharmaceutical sales, which paid well and required constant travel. She was the kind of person who could walk into a hospital or clinic and convince doctors to prescribe her company's medications. She was excellent at her job and largely indifferent to it. The work paid for the house and the vacations and the security that made her feel like an adult. David was a corporate attorney at a prestigious firm downtown. His work was demanding but prestigious. He made more money than Keisha, though neither of them had ever explicitly stated that fact. It was simply understood in the way they made decisions, in whose career took priority in their planning. They had married young, at 26 and 28. Keisha had been a different person then, more hopeful, less aware of how small most people's lives actually become. David had been charming and stable, qualities that seemed to matter more as Keisha got older and more concerned with not failing. They bought a house in the suburbs. They decorated it with furniture from design catalogs. They attended cocktail parties where they talked about their careers and other people's divorces. They had settled into the kind of marriage that doesn't end because there's no particular reason for it to, not because it's satisfying. Keisha had stopped expecting passion many years ago. She had made peace with the functional nature of their relationship. She told herself that most marriages were like this, that the couples who claimed to be passionate were lying or would eventually become bored like everyone else. When Keisha told David about the lump, he was at his office. She could hear his assistant in the background, the faint sound of the law firm's busy hum. He took the phone into his private office. She knew by the sudden quiet. He listened to what she said about the appointment, about the biopsy, about the doctor's concerns. Then he did what she needed him to do. He said he would be at the biopsy appointment with her. He said he would rearrange his schedule. He said cancer was serious, but they would handle it. He said he had done some preliminary research already, just in case, and the survival rates for her age and stage were actually quite good. He was organized about it, methodical, the way he was methodical about everything. This was the David that Keisha had married, even if she didn't particularly like him most days. This was the version of David who could be relied upon. The first chemotherapy appointment was scheduled for a Tuesday morning at the cancer center 2 towns over. David drove. Keisha sat in the passenger seat wearing a wig she had bought preemptively, a sleek black thing that made her look like someone else entirely, someone more put together than she felt. The cancer center looked like any modern medical building, all glass and pale wood and careful landscaping meant to suggest calm. Inside, everything changed. The waiting room was full of sick people. Old people mostly, but some younger ones too. Keisha realized with a specific kind of terror that this was where she would be spending the next 6 months of her life. This fluorescent-lit room, with its outdated magazines and its smell of fear underneath the aggressive cleaning products. A nurse called her back. David stood and went with her, just as he had promised. Keisha was ushered into a treatment room, where a comfortable reclining chair sat beside a machine that looked vaguely futuristic and absolutely malevolent. The IV port was already in place from an earlier procedure. A line went directly into her chest, a permanent fixture that would deliver poison directly into her bloodstream. The nurse explained the process with practiced kindness. She explained what the medication would do. She explained the timing. 3 hours for this first infusion. Keisha would probably feel fine during it, and terrible afterward. Her body would start to break down within days. The nurse was honest in a way that Keisha appreciated, even as she felt the ground shifting beneath her understanding of the world. David held her hand while the drugs went in. For the first hour, nothing visible happened. The medication dripped slowly into the port, and Keisha sat in the reclining chair and tried to breathe normally, while her body received a chemical assault it was too weak to fight. David talked about his day at the office. He told her about a difficult client, about a case he was working on, about the firm's politics and his various alliances with partners. He was trying to distract her with normalcy, with the ordinary details of a life that was not in a cancer center. Keisha appreciated the attempt even as she understood how inadequate it was. Nothing could distract from what was happening. Nothing could make this normal. But David was trying, and that mattered. That meant he was still here. That meant he was choosing to be present for this. 2 weeks after the first chemotherapy treatment, Keisha's hair started to fall out. She knew it would happen. The nurse had warned her. But knowing something intellectually and experiencing it are different things entirely. She was in the shower, running her fingers through her hair the way she had done 10,000 times in her life, and suddenly her fingers were holding a handful of wet black strands. She didn't scream, though she wanted to. She stood in the shower and watched the hair go down the drain, and understood, with a clarity that was almost physical, that her body was no longer her own. It belonged to the cancer, and to the treatments meant to kill the cancer. It was becoming a vessel for poison and loss. David was in the bedroom when she got out of the shower. She didn't tell him what had happened in the shower. She got dressed with her wig already in place and came downstairs. He was on his laptop, reviewing documents for work. He glanced up and told her she looked nice. She didn't tell him that she looked that way because she was hiding the fact that her hair was falling out in the shower. She sat on the couch beside him and they watched television for an hour without talking. He was already pulling away, though Keisha didn't fully recognize it yet. He had been present for the first appointment. He was checking the boxes that made him a supportive spouse. But presence and support are not the same thing. By the end of the first month of chemotherapy, Keisha had stopped working. Her company approved a medical leave of absence, initially for 3 months, potentially longer. The loss of income was terrifying in a way she had not anticipated. She had always made her own money. She had never been entirely dependent on anyone. But David was making plenty. He told her not to worry. He told her to focus on getting better. She tried to believe him. She tried to trust that money was not an issue. But she spent hours online looking at medical bills, calculating copays and deductibles, understanding that cancer was expensive even with insurance, even with the good insurance that David's firm provided. Around the same time, Keisha noticed that David was using his phone differently. He would take it into another room or put it face down on the table. He would smile slightly at messages in a way that felt private, directed at something other than his marriage. When Keisha asked him who he was talking to, He said it was work. It was always work. The firm was demanding. There was a big case. He needed to stay in constant contact with colleagues. Keisha believed this because believing it was easier than not believing it. She was tired. She was sick. She was bald and losing weight, and weak in her bones. She did not have the energy to worry that her husband was potentially doing something that would hurt her. So she chose not to see it. But the signs were accumulating. He came home one evening smelling like cologne that she didn't recognize. Not his cologne. Something sweeter, younger smelling. He explained that his colleague Amber had spilled her perfume at the office, and it had gotten on him during a meeting. The explanation was plausible. Keisha had met Amber at a firm event 6 months earlier. She was young, probably late 20s, and conventionally attractive in the way that young women tend to be. Keisha was 43. She was bald. She was weak. She understood, without being told, that she was not competing in the same arena anymore. She was the sick wife. Amber, by contrast, seemed to radiate vitality. Keisha told herself that she was being paranoid. David was stressed about work. He was worried about her health. It made sense that he would seek casual conversations with people who made him feel normal, who reminded him of his life before his wife got cancer. The deterioration was not one moment, but a series of moments, each small enough to rationalize individually. David stopped coming to her chemotherapy appointments. He said work was too demanding. He said his presence might actually stress her, might undermine her focus on healing. He said the nurses would take good care of her. Keisha's first solo chemotherapy appointment was in her 5th week of treatment. She drove herself, because the drugs made her too nauseous to think clearly, but she drove anyway, because David had a client meeting and he could not rearrange his schedule. In the treatment room, she sat alone in the reclining chair. An older woman in a chair across from her reached over and held her hand while the IV went in. They didn't talk much, but the woman's hand was warm and present in a way that David's had stopped being. By week 6, Keisha's pharmaceutical company announced a restructuring. Her entire division was being consolidated. There was a severance package. There was the option to apply for other roles within the company, but those roles were mostly in other cities. Her position as a pharmaceutical sales representative, a job that had defined much of her adult identity, was simply gone. She received the news on a Tuesday via email from her director. She sat at the kitchen table and read it 3 times, trying to make the words mean something different than what they said. Then she called David. He was in a meeting. He texted her back that they would talk about it later. They never really talked about it. He came home that night, asked her if she wanted to order dinner, and went into his office to work. The loss of her job and its income seemed to slide into the growing list of things that were not being discussed. Before we go any further, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We read every single one. And if this story is hitting close to home, make sure you're subscribed so you never miss what's coming next. It was a Tuesday in late February when everything broke open. Keisha had an infusion appointment scheduled for late morning. She had been through 5 rounds by this point. Round 6 would be the last one. She had been counting down, holding on to the idea that if she could just survive this final round, her body could begin to heal. She had prepared herself for what she would face: the chair, the IV, the slow drip of poison into her bloodstream, the way her body would revolt against her for the next 48 hours. She had not prepared herself for David. He arrived in the middle of her infusion. The chemotherapy was running. Her arm was tied into place with the needle and line. She could not stand up quickly. She could not move away. She was trapped in the reclining chair in a way that she would understand, much later, was the entire point of his timing. He was not alone. Behind him came a woman that Keisha recognized immediately, though she had never seen her in person. It was Amber. She was younger than she had appeared in the firm photos that David had once carelessly left open on his laptop. She was polished and put together, and radiating the particular kind of confidence that comes from not yet understanding that the world is willing to take everything from you. David walked to Keisha's chair with the casual confidence of a man about to change someone's life. Amber followed, looking around the treatment center with a kind of clinical detachment, as if she were assessing the real estate value of a cancer center. David said her name and said he wanted to introduce her to someone. He said it casually, the way he might introduce a colleague at a party. Amber shook Keisha's hand. She said she had heard a lot about her. She said that David spoke about Keisha often, which was a lie, though Keisha would not fully process that lie until much later. Then David said it. He said he had been doing a lot of thinking. He said he realized that he could not handle what Keisha was going through. He said her illness was too much for him. He said he was not the kind of person who could be strong for someone else, that he needed to be around people who could make him feel like himself. He said he thought it would be best if they separated. He said that staying in the marriage was putting both of them under too much stress. He said Keisha needed to focus on her health, and he needed to focus on his own well-being. He said it all very reasonably, as if they were discussing a business arrangement rather than the dissolution of a marriage. Then he pulled something from his jacket, a folded document, legal papers, a separation agreement that he had clearly prepared with a lawyer. He had printed it, had it ready, had planned this entire moment with the precision of someone organizing a board meeting. He handed it to Keisha. Her arm was still tethered to the IV. Her other hand was weak and shaking. A nurse nearby saw what was happening and moved closer, unsure what she was witnessing but understanding that something violent was occurring. Keisha took the papers, or tried to. They almost fell. David did not pick them up. A nurse picked them up and set them on Keisha's lap. The papers felt like they weighed 10,000 pounds. David said that he needed her to sign them as soon as possible. He said that the sooner they made this official, the sooner they could both move on. He said he was sure her lawyer would contact his lawyer, and they could sort out the financial details. He said it all very quickly, like he had rehearsed it, and then he and Amber turned and walked out of the infusion center. They did not walk quickly. They did not run. They walked with the casual pace of people leaving a coffee shop. Keisha sat in her chair while the chemotherapy continued to drip into her body. She was bald. She was weak. She was in the middle of a treatment designed to poison the cancer inside her, and her husband had just announced that he was leaving her with his girlfriend watching. Other patients were looking at her. Some of them had seen what happened. Nurses were gathering, unsure how to help. One of them, a woman named Patricia, who had been infusing Keisha's chemotherapy drugs for weeks, put her hand on Keisha's shoulder and asked if she was okay. Keisha could not answer. She could not cry properly because she was mid-infusion, and her body was already so broken down that the chemical processes of grief felt like they might actually kill her. Keisha finished chemotherapy alone. She had one final round scheduled for 1 month later. She could have missed it. She could have decided that she was done with treatment, done with her body being poisoned, done with fighting. Some people make that choice, and there is a kind of grace in accepting death when death is coming. But Keisha had something that David had taken away from her. She had rage. She had realized, by the time her 6th and final chemotherapy appointment came around, that David was probably relieved to have left. He had probably been planning this for months. He had probably felt trapped in their marriage, and her illness was the thing that gave him permission to leave. Keisha decided that she would survive cancer, if for no other reason than to prove to him that she did not need him. The final round of chemotherapy was at the end of March. Keisha drove herself. She sat in the chair alone. Patricia was there infusing her drugs, but there was a different quality to it this time. This time Keisha was infusing to survive, not just to treat. The drugs went in, and her body received them, and she held on to something that she could not quite name, but felt like power. It was not happiness. It was not hope, exactly. It was something smaller and harder. It was determination. It was rage. It was the decision to not give David the satisfaction of knowing that he had broken her. But the cancer treatments were only part of what broke her. After chemotherapy came surgery, a double mastectomy scheduled for April. The surgery was necessary, essential, but it was also a violation that her body had already endured so much violation that she was not sure she had any capacity left to endure anything else. David sent her a card. It was a nice card, probably purchased from a high-end stationery store. It said that he was thinking of her and hoped that her recovery went well. He signed it with his name only. There was no personal message. There was no expression of anything that looked like regret or care. Keisha threw the card away. The financial catastrophe became apparent in the months after her surgery. Medical bills arrived weekly, Chemotherapy, $80,000. Surgery, $60,000. Radiation therapy would be another $30,000. Even with insurance, even with co-pays and deductibles, she owed tens of thousands of dollars out of pocket. She had no income. She had not worked in 4 months. Her savings were depleted. The house had a mortgage. There were property taxes. There was the basic cost of surviving in the world. David's lawyer filed for separation. David's lawyer argued that the medical debt belonged to Keisha alone, that David should not be responsible for treating her cancer. His argument was technically within the bounds of the law, which meant that Keisha's financial destruction was legal. By the time Keisha was declared cancer-free in late June, she had also filed for bankruptcy. She had been approved for a smaller severance package from her now former pharmaceutical company. She had been offered a job by a smaller pharmaceutical company, a position with lower pay and less prestige but with actual work. The position required her to travel, which meant she could not afford to sit at home and heal. She was back on the road 4 weeks after her mastectomy, driving between hospitals and clinics, selling medications to doctors who did not know that she had cancer, who would not have cared if they had known. She smiled at work. She went home and fell apart. She repeated this every day for 3 months until it became something like normal. The divorce was finalized in December of that year. David paid minimal spousal support, a calculation based on the length of the marriage and the income differential, but heavily reduced because of his assertion that Keisha had income potential and could return to work. Which was true. Technically, she had returned to work. But returning to work while recovering from cancer surgery, radiation, and chemotherapy is not the same as being capable of working. Her body was devastated. Her immune system was compromised. She caught every illness that came around. She missed work. She lost income. She spiraled. In January of the 2nd year after her diagnosis, Keisha quit her job. Her oncologist had asked her why she was still working in pharmaceutical sales. He asked her what the point was, what she was trying to prove. She realized, in that moment in his office, that she was trying to prove something to David. She was trying to be successful enough that he would regret leaving her. She was trying to build something that would make him understand what he had lost. She was still, somehow, still performing for a man who had walked out on her while she was mid-chemotherapy. Keisha decided to rebuild her life in a way that was not in response to David, but in response to herself. She had always been interested in wellness. She had always understood how to motivate people. She had always known how to listen. Those skills which she had deployed to sell medications could be deployed in service of something that actually mattered. She started offering wellness coaching to other cancer survivors, initially for free. She met with women from her support group. She developed a framework based on the practical challenges of returning to life after cancer, how to rebuild your body, how to rebuild your career, how to rebuild your confidence when your body had betrayed you and your partner had abandoned you. Her first paid client was a woman named Elena who had been in her chemotherapy treatment center years earlier. Elena had finished treatment but could not return to work. She was terrified of her body, terrified that the cancer would return, terrified that she was broken permanently. Keisha worked with Elena for 6 weeks, not on mindfulness or breathing exercises, but on practical skills and emotional truth-telling. She helped Elena understand that her body was not broken because it had cancer. She helped Elena understand that returning to the workforce did not have to mean returning to the same job. She helped Elena understand that she deserved to build a life that was good for her, not just a life that made other people comfortable. Elena got a new job. She called Keisha crying to tell her that she had been hired. Keisha, listening to that call, realized that she had just accomplished something that felt more real than any pharmaceutical sale she had ever made. This was work that mattered. This was work that changed people's lives. She started offering wellness coaching more seriously. She created an online course about returning to work after cancer. She started documenting her own journey on social media, just to process her own trauma, but the posts started getting attention from other survivors. Within 6 months, she had a handful of paying clients. Within a year, she had a waiting list. Within 2 years, her wellness coaching business was generating more income than pharmaceutical sales had. She published an ebook, Unmade: How I Rebuilt Everything After Diagnosis and Abandonment. She did not hide her story. She did not sanitize it. She wrote about her marriage and its dissolution. She wrote about David by name, actually, though she later changed it in the publication. She wrote about the specific cruelty of his abandonment. She wrote about what it cost her to rebuild. The book sold thousands of copies. People emailed her. Survivors wrote to her saying that her story had saved their lives, that knowing they were not alone had given them permission to stop pretending to be fine. By 2022, Keisha had built a significant business. She was running multiple programs: one-on-one wellness coaching, group coaching, online courses, a membership community for cancer survivors. She was earning 6 figures annually. She had built wealth on her own foundation. She had a financial advisor who helped her invest. She bought a house with cash from her own earnings. She owned nothing to anyone. She was solvent in a way that she had not been since before her cancer diagnosis. She was also becoming a public figure. She was invited to speak at cancer treatment centers and wellness conferences. Magazines profiled her. From abandoned to entrepreneur, the woman who turned her cancer diagnosis into a movement. Keisha Thomas: How One Survivor Built an Empire. She was uncomfortable with this attention initially, but she understood the power of visibility. Other survivors saw her story and understood that recovery was possible. Other women saw what she had built and understood that they could build something too. She embraced the platform, not out of ego, but out of understanding that visibility was its own form of power. Her social media following grew to hundreds of thousands, 500,000 followers across platforms by 2023. Brands wanted to partner with her. Wellness companies, cancer nonprofits, health insurance providers all wanted her endorsement. She was selective about who she worked with, but she was also strategic. She understood that her platform was valuable and that she deserved to be compensated for it. She started making significant money from sponsorships. She expanded her team. She hired people to help manage her business so that she could focus on the creative and transformational work that mattered to her. In 2021, during a cancer survivor support group meeting, she met Jordan. Jordan was 5 years out from a lymphoma diagnosis, rebuilt and thriving, the kind of person who understood survival because they had survived. Jordan was kind, without being performing kind. Jordan was confident without being arrogant. Jordan loved Keisha, gradually and then completely, for exactly who she was, a woman who had been broken by cancer and abandonment, and had chosen to rebuild herself. There was no performance between them. There was no financial dependence. There was just 2 people who had survived and wanted to build a life together that was based on mutual respect and actual love. By 2024, Keisha was undeniably powerful. She walked into rooms and people recognized her. She had been featured in wellness magazines. She had been on podcasts. She had been quoted in articles about entrepreneurship and recovery. She wore her mastectomy scars visibly, in dresses that showed the evidence of what her body had survived. She had stopped hiding. She had stopped apologizing for the ways that her body had changed. Her scars were beautiful because of what she had survived, not despite it. She had built a life that was entirely hers. No man's wife, no corporation's employee, no body's definition but her own. In the fall of 2024, Keisha received an invitation to speak at a gala hosted by a major cancer nonprofit foundation. It was an honor. She was being recognized for her work in the cancer survivor community. She was being invited as a featured speaker, which meant a significant speaking fee and significant visibility. The gala was being held in the city where David still lived, where his law firm still operated. She knew that David might be there. The nonprofit had relationships with his firm. He might have been involved in legal work with them. Keisha considered not going. She considered declining the invitation, taking her accolades and staying in the background where she had learned to operate. But then she realized something. This was not his space. This was not his gala. This was her community. These were the people she had served, the survivors she had helped rebuild their lives. She belonged in that room more than he did. she decided to go. The gala was held on a Friday evening in October at a hotel downtown. The ballroom was filled with 500 people: doctors, nurses, hospital administrators, cancer survivors, donors, media. Keisha wore a dress that showed her scars. It was a beautiful dress, an expensive dress, the kind of dress that was made to be seen. She was introduced by the nonprofit's executive director as a champion of survivor wellness, as an entrepreneur who had built a thriving business around helping other survivors. She was celebrated. She was photographed. She was surrounded by people who wanted to talk to her, who wanted to thank her, who wanted to tell her that her work had changed their lives. An hour into the gala, the awards ceremony began. The nonprofit gave out several awards annually: medical leadership, nursing excellence, survivor advocacy, community impact. Keisha had been told that she was a finalist for the Leadership and Community Impact Award, but she did not know if she had won. She sat at a table with Jordan and several of her wellness coaching clients who had attended the gala. When the announcer opened the envelope and read her name, the room erupted in applause. Keisha stood and hugged Jordan and made her way to the stage. She was supposed to give a brief thank you speech, no more than a minute or two. She stepped up to the microphone and looked out at the room. She saw people she knew. She saw several of her clients. She saw nurses from her chemotherapy treatments, all those years ago. And she saw David. He was sitting at a table near the back of the ballroom, with his wife Amber, now his legal wife after 5 years of marriage. He was looking at her with an expression that was hard to read, some mixture of shock and shame, and something else that might have been regret. Keisha looked at the award in her hands and then at the microphone. She decided in that moment to tell the truth. She decided to tell the story that had brought her to this stage. She decided to name what had happened to her and what she had built from it. She said, "I was not going to say anything else tonight, but I need to. This award means something to me that you might not understand. When I was diagnosed with stage 3 breast cancer in 2019, I was married. I had everything I thought mattered. And when my doctor told me I had cancer, my first instinct was to protect my husband from the burden." She paused. She looked directly at David. "I thought, he loves me, he'll help me through this, we'll get through this together. But 5 weeks into chemotherapy, while I was in a hospital chair with poison in my veins, while I was bald and weak and terrified, my husband walked in with his girlfriend and told me he was leaving me, in front of nurses, in front of other patients, in front of witnesses. He handed me a separation agreement while my hair was falling out and my body was shutting down." Her voice was controlled, but anger was present underneath it, a slow burn of rage that had been building for 5 years and was now finally being expressed without apology. And you know what the worst part was? It wasn't the abandonment. It wasn't even the betrayal. It was realizing that I had spent years protecting someone who wasn't worth protecting. I spent years managing his emotions, worrying about his stress, being the strong one so he wouldn't have to be. And the moment I actually needed him to be strong for me, the moment I needed his love to mean something, he ran. She wipes her eyes, but she was not crying in a gentle way. This was anger expressing itself through tears. So to the man sitting in this room right now who thinks he made the right choice leaving me, I want you to know something. I'm not grateful for what you did. I'm not transformed because of your cruelty. I'm powerful despite you. I would have been this person anyway. You just accelerated the timeline by removing yourself from my life. You thought I was weak because I had cancer, but I survived cancer. What you didn't survive was the truth of who I actually am. And now you get to watch me be everything you could never achieve, and you don't even get to be part of the story." The room was completely silent now. People were crying. Some were nodding. There was a particular kind of electricity in the space, the electricity of truth being spoken in a room full of people who recognized the truth in it. "That's your real punishment," she continued. "Not my anger. Not my hatred. Just irrelevance. You don't get to be in my story anymore. And I'm completely okay with that. Thank you to the real people in my life. The ones who stayed. The ones who believed in me. The ones who love me for all of me. The scars. The trauma. The survival. That's what I'm grateful for." She set down the award and stepped back from the microphone. The room erupted. People stood. They applauded. Some were openly crying. Keisha stepped down from the stage and was immediately surrounded by people who wanted to embrace her, to thank her, to tell her that her words had mattered. Later, after the formal ceremony concluded, David approached her. He tried to speak to her. He said her name and started to form words that might have been an apology or an explanation. Keisha saw him coming. She let him approach. She said, "No, you don't get to speak right now. You had 5 years. You had that entire gala. You had my entire life to say something. You chose silence and cowardice instead." Her voice was low, controlled fury. People around them had started to notice, had started to look over. She did not care. "You want to know the real cruelty of what you did? It wasn't leaving me. People leave all the time. It was leaving me in the most humiliating way possible, in the most public place possible, during the most vulnerable moment of my life. You knew it would destroy me. You did it anyway, and you brought her to make it worse." David tried to speak again. He said he didn't know how to handle her illness. Keisha cut him off. "Exactly. You didn't know. You still don't know. And that's the saddest part. You're not even a villain. You're just a coward who got lucky until he didn't. I spent years being small so you could feel big. I spent years managing your feelings so you wouldn't have to feel anything real. And the moment I stopped performing that role, you couldn't handle it. You couldn't handle my sickness. You couldn't handle my need. You couldn't handle anything that required actual strength from you." She stepped closer to him. Her eyes were fierce and completely clear. "And the worst part? I forgave you years ago. I'm not angry because I'm hurt. I'm angry because I wasted time on someone so insignificant, so small. You might want to ask your wife what she's really capable of when things get hard. Ask her what happens when you stop being convenient to him. I know the answer." Then she turned away from him. She took Jordan's hand. They walked together toward the exit, leaving David standing alone in his expensive suit, surrounded by people who had just heard the story of his abandonment and cruelty. He stood there understanding, finally, what he had lost, and what he would never have: the chance to be part of Keisha's story. She had moved on not just from cancer, not just from financial devastation, not just from abandonment, but from the need for his validation entirely. That irrelevance, that complete absence of his relevance to her life, was the punishment that no revenge could deliver.
Like this video and hit subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next.